So this year, 2023, marks the 60th anniversary of Dr. King's March on Washington. It was called the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. Dr. King and his co-organizers planned for 100,000 people to attend that day, they hoped, but there were over twice that number gathered on the National Mall that August day. And in the weeks leading up to the march, King workshopped the speech that he would give with his team of organizers and counselors, hoping to deliver a speech that would capture the imagination of a country, much like Lincoln's Gettysburg Address. And he was never planning on using the rhetoric of the dream he had for America's future and America's children. Now, he had been using that phrasing about the dream in various speeches for a while, but his advisors suggested that it was trite and overdone. And so this speech he wrote for the March on Washington, the one he brought with him onto the dais that afternoon, was an entirely different speech. It was called Normalcy, Never Again. But it wasn't hitting right. When it came down to it, when he started to speak, the energy just was not there. Does anyone know what happened next? Then it was his favorite singer, Mahalia Jackson, who had heard him speak a number of times, and she knew what would capture the moment. And so she called out. Does anyone know what she called out?
We have a hand over here.
Tell them about the dream, Martin. That's right. So he set his paper aside and he told them about his dream. And for a brief time, it became everyone's dream. It was captivating in part, I think, because it was focused on a future era, a time when finally justice would roll down like water and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. You see, the speech pointed in a direction forward enough that white folks could settle down a little bit and stop worrying about the changes they might have to make immediately. See, a dream is ethereal. It does not dictate one's actions in the present moment. And something about this dream speech did give white Americans license to respond to King's call for action with that lovely idea that asks nothing of us in the moment except maybe to begin to think about moving in slow increments someday. Now, the letter Dr. Stringer read earlier in this worship service, well, that was King's public response to the white backlash he had received after his I Have a Dream speech, which he gave in August of 63, this letter he wrote in 64 on the Saturday Evening Post. Some white leaders were criticizing King and the whole movement, saying he was demanding society move too fast. They really liked the rhetoric of someday, as long as someday never arrived. Now, in this letter that Dr. Stringer read, King speaks of a grand alliance between white and black people in America. And within that letter, he also emits a warning. Did you hear it? That without a grand alliance, well, then there could only be a small fringe alliance between the races. And if a few black extremists and a few white extremists manage to divide their people, well, the tragic result will be the ascendancy of extreme reaction which exploits all people. And my friends, on this January, only 2 years after the United States Capitol was violently breached by right-wing extremists who wish to exploit democracy and in turn everything we stand for, it does seem that we are unfortunately situated in this latter tension that King describes. And King's warning was unfortunately the place where we now find ourselves. And it makes me wonder. I wonder if change has taken too long, if too many people have grown up without King's voice reverberating across the decades and into their hearts, if that voice has instead been replaced with greed and white victimization. Powerful forces in Congress and Senate and the Supreme Court have chipped away at progress, have stalled us now in a semi-permanent state of compromise and continued oppression. But in King's America, which I pray is our America, it is not the people who have held the privilege who should decide the pace of change in our nation. Because for people who have privilege, someday is a very appealing concept. We can always look forward at our imagination at King's dream and say, sure, that sounds great. We'll walk hand in hand someday. We will live in peace someday. We will have voting rights someday. We will have economic equality someday. We will have Medicare for all someday. We will end the cash bail system someday. Sometimes it feels like what rolls down is tears. What we need is a liberation, not of someday, but of the present. Today demands more resilience for the people who have lived comfortably in the shadow of someday. Amen? Amen. The pace of change must be determined by Americans who have been marginalized for so long, who have been caught in the steel trap of the criminal legal system. I'll not call it a justice system. Who have settled for less, who have endured life in the rural and urban slums King mentioned, while white Americans benefit from the inheritance of a legacy founded on slave labor. The foundation of this nation's economy that was a time of, let's face it, great prosperity for many Southern white families and pure hell for Africans and African Americans. The hopeful future King was referring to in his dream is now. It is now. And that dream is taking too long to be realized. And the truth is, as we sit here today, there are parts of King's dream that have taken shape, that have borne fruit. I do not want to deny all of the progress that has been made. But there are other parts of that dream that have become a collective national nightmare. And there are many who also believe that something close to a collective nightmare is necessary to shake the foundations of the white moderate or even the white liberal. And I know some believe that we are in a time of world wars and evil across the globe out there, but the truth is, we still have not reconciled with the evil at our own doorstep. America's founding wound continues to fester. And we continue to find it acceptable to live in the spirit of the fugitive slave law. That time in the United States after 1860, when for years after emancipation, white former slave owners were free to round up black people and ship them back down to plantations and reclaim them as property. Now, we have been living in America in a continued cycle of redlining, real estate gentrification, mass incarceration, predatory cash bail, all of these policies that keep black families from accruing the kind of generational wealth that so many white Americans benefit from. Even as inflation soars, the cost of childcare and healthcare continue to rise. Some people are making out pretty good. And to give you just one small example of the festering wound that I'm talking about, of the evil we still have to face in our own yard. Many of you know I serve on the founding board of directors of the Georgia Interfaith Public Policy Center. Thank you to Joy Bora for for helping me get to that lovely board. We are a group of faith leaders who work to educate our legislators up there on the Gold Dome, down there. While many of us support policies such as an immediate end to the death penalty in Georgia, full Medicaid expansion across the state, ending the cash bail system, and many more human rights causes that largely affect Black and Indigenous people of color in Georgia, well, we have also committed as a board to stay in good relationship with all of our legislators and to try to work only on winnable bills. Okay, that's good, but here's where we've come. Here's how far we've come. In the 4 years of our existence, the most meaningful bill, really the only bill we have successfully worked on, in 2019, we helped pass HB 345, which bans the shackling of an incarcerated pregnant woman during labor. That's it. That's what we call low-hanging fruit. Now, I was shocked beyond belief that any state would engage in that medieval practice in 2019, but here we are. So no, we are not moving too fast. No, the moral arc of the universe, it may bend toward justice, but right about now, it is moving slow as molasses. So what is needed is to increase the pace of change. We got to speed it up. A sense of inescapable mutuality. In this post-pandemic era, our society has come to feel more individualized than ever. So many people saying, look, as long as me and my family are safe, healthy, and accruing personal wealth, we're good. But that was not Martin's dream. We still need that grand alliance consisting of large majorities of all races of Americans. And for one summer in 2020, it did feel like we could get there. Remember that? It was a new generation of Americans waking up, awakening to the pervasive threat of police violence that many Black people continue to endure. Those last echoes of the fugitive slave law still reverberating throughout our nation. Well, what do we need spiritually among us to answer the call of our Unitarian Universalist faith that calls us to stay open to change? Because change always sounds great when we are the ones leading the change. But when change happens to us, particularly when we have enjoyed the privilege, maybe due to our complexion or to our economic status, well then, it seems we struggle to find the personal motivation for change. We struggle with change. And so there are a few spiritual tools, I think, that we need to collect to develop our resilience for change, because there is more change coming our way. We need the gift of insight, the gift of seeing things as they truly are, to see that a loss of privilege is not the same thing as victimization. The loss of privilege does not mean you are a victim. It might mean we are getting closer to equality. It might be what you need to overcome. We shall overcome. Maybe what we shall overcome is that loss of privilege for some of us. Insight, that spiritual insight that allows us to see that maybe not everyone is happy with the status quo, even if we are, and to align with those who are suffering, who have struggled, even as we have maybe thrived. And if we are trying to disrupt new leadership or resist the change they are calling for, well, the gift of insight can help you see the power dynamics more clearly. I mean, who is making up the new leadership that you are finding yourself protesting? if it is young people, if it is people of color and queer people, will those who have long been on the margins and are now taking up the reins of leadership, well, then maybe their time has come, and maybe they could use your support. The second thing required for resilience is adaptability. Adaptability, that nimble creativity of moving from seeing something as a problem to seeing it as a possibility, from problem to possibility. Now, this can be exhausting, I know, which is why you will hear so many people in justice movements and hopefully in the congregation talk about self-care. Self-care is real. It's what we need to manage and handle the dynamism of a changing world. And while some people are energized by innovating and creative thinking, it can also be draining. Now, I am a fairly adaptable person. I'd like to think I'm a very adaptable person. And at some point in the pandemic, even I suffered from innovation fatigue. And another thing a resilient person needs is connection. A resilient person is a connected person. It is through our relationships that we draw inspiration and accountability. And if we are not in healthy relationship with those who are most affected by policies and changes, well, then we risk staying isolated and stuck in our own thinking. I also believe resilience to change requires a little faith, a little surrender. The central idea at the core of this worship series that we are entering into, Gods of Change, the central idea is the notion that arises from Octavia Butler's seminal sci-fi novel, The Parable of the Sower, that God is neither good nor bad, but only change. God is change, she writes. Everything you change changes you. Who would we be if we worshiped change? If we praised change? If all Proverbs taught how to stay resilient to change? What if we sang only hymns of love to change? If we wrote the gospel of change? Well, I think we are writing that gospel right now. The prophets of possibility, like Martin Luther King Jr., well, they are speaking to us now. And it will not be a single great act of unity, but the small efforts of individuals to make all of those possibilities that he set forth into a reality. So today, and every day, we must each do one small thing that brings us closer to that grand alliance. The grand alliance of all people of all races to be working for equity and equality for all. To show solidarity with the causes that the Black people in your community and your congregation are asking you to support. If you are being asked to support a cause by the people in your congregation who are marginalized, it is time to show up for their cause and make it your own. The dream of radical societal change is no longer a future dream, my friends. There is only one right time for that dream to be realized. The time is now. Amen.